It was Christmas Eve. I came home without telling anyone. I wanted to surprise my daughter, Liana, but what I found that night broke my heart. I saw Liana sitting outside her own house, shaking in the freezing cold. It was only 32 degrees Fahrenheit. She didn't even have a blanket to keep her warm. Inside the house, my son-in-law's family was laughing loudly, drinking champagne, and sitting by the warm fireplace. I didn't think. I just acted. I ran up the porch, scooped Liana into my arms, and kicked the door open. As I held my daughter tightly, I said 6 strong words that came from my heart. If you're watching this video, like it, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story from. I want to see how far this story will go. I stepped out of the taxi, my heavy boots sinking into thick snow outside Liana's house in Boise, Idaho. The icy wind slapped against my face like it wanted to peel my skin away. I pulled up the collar of my coat, trying to stay warm. I was used to challenges. As a Taekwondo coach, I had traveled a lot, trained in hot gyms, and stood in freezing arenas. But this cold was something else. I stood there, staring at Liana's warm-looking house. It glowed with bright Christmas lights. I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. I hadn't seen my daughter in months, and I couldn't wait to surprise her. The front yard was buried under snow. No one had even shoveled it. There were no footprints. It looked like nobody cared. Through the big window, I could see the cozy glow of the living room. Christmas music was playing from a speaker. The song Jingle Bells, Liana's favorite when she was a little girl, floated through the air. I walked closer, peeking inside. A long table with a bright red tablecloth was set with lots of food. There was a golden roasted turkey, steaming cornbread stuffing, cranberry salad with shiny pieces of apple and raisins, and glasses of red wine sparkling in the light. The Sterling family, my son-in-law Caspian's parents and relatives, were all there. Mr. Alistair Sterling sat at the head of the table, looking important. Mrs. Genevieve Sterling, his wife, held a glass of wine with a smug smile. Caspian's sister, Serafina, was laughing with her 2 little kids. They were all raising their glasses, toasting happily around the warm fireplace. But where was Liana? I frowned and tried to see more. Maybe she was in the kitchen or sitting in a corner. I'd imagine her smiling and happy, wrapping her arms around me like she used to as a child. Then I heard it. A faint sound. A soft whimper. I turned my head and my heart stopped. Liana was sitting outside on the porch, next to a snow-covered plant. She was curled up on an old wooden chair, wearing only a thin blouse. Her shoulders shook as she shivered, and her messy hair stuck to her wet forehead. I ran to her, panic rushing through me. "Liana," I shouted, my voice breaking. I ripped off my warm coaching jacket and wrapped it around her. Her skin was ice cold. Liana looked up at me. Her eyes were red from crying, and her lips were pale. "Mom," she whispered so softly I could barely hear. Then she collapsed in my arms. I hugged her tight. "I'm here, sweetheart." "I'm here," I whispered, though tears burned in my eyes. I pulled a sweater from my bag and wrapped her in it. Then I lifted her into my arms. Her wet slippers fell off, leaving a trail in the snow. I held her close, feeling how weak and cold she was. All I wanted was to get her somewhere safe, away from this freezing porch. Inside the house, the laughter continued. Caspian's deep, proud voice carried through the air, followed by loud clinking of glasses. They were warm and happy by the fire while my daughter froze outside. Just a few hours ago, I had been at the Boise airport. I was still sweaty from coaching the national Taekwondo team for a week. I was so excited to come home. I could barely wait to see Liana smile. Liana had always been my sunshine. As a little girl, she clung to my legs and begged me for bedtime stories. Her smile had always made my hardest days better. But my job had taken me away from her so much. Seattle, tournaments, coaching camps. I always told myself, just one more trip, then I'll be with her. Now I was here, ready for a Christmas surprise. In the airport, I tried calling Liana. The phone rang and rang. No answer. I tried again and again. Still nothing. I sent her a message, "Mom's on her way. You home?" But there was no reply. I told myself she was busy decorating the Christmas tree like every year. When my plane landed, I stepped out of the airport into the freezing night. Families hugged each other, heading to church. A dad carried his little girl on his shoulders. She giggled, holding a candy cane. I remembered carrying Liana like that when she was small. I grabbed a taxi and told the driver, "Take me to Meadow Creek, 12th Street." On the way, I saw a group of police officers directing traffic. One of them was Kale, a former student from my Taekwondo class. I rolled down the window and waved. "Kale." He looked up surprised. "Miss Alara, you're back." I smiled. "Yeah, just finished training in Seattle. Still working here." He nodded, but his smile faded when I mentioned Liana. A worried look crossed his face. He tried to hide it, but I noticed. "Is something wrong, Kale?" I asked. He shook his head quickly. No. Just glad to see you, Miss Alara." But I could tell something was wrong. The taxi drove off, leaving Kale standing there, gripping his cap tightly. As we got close to Liana's house, I asked the driver to stop a little early. I wanted to surprise her. I dragged my suitcase through the snow. The houses around glowed like candles. I thought I could hear Liana singing inside, just like she used to when she was a kid. I left my suitcase on the steps, took a deep breath, and got ready to knock. But then a mocking laugh cut through the air. I froze, my hand in the air. Through the door, I heard Mr. Alistair Sterling's voice. That's what they call a daughter-in-law. A woman who can't even have kids. For miscarriages. She's embarrassed us enough. Caspian's cold voice joined in. She's always pretending to be depressed, locking herself in her room. If it weren't for my parents, I'd have kicked her out. Another laugh. Then Serafina's voice. Yeah, she's useless. A wife who can't have kids. She's just faking sickness to get attention. Pathetic. Each word stabbed my heart. My daughter had been through so much pain, and now they were mocking her. I clenched my fists, furious. Then I saw Liana, sitting on that porch chair in the snow, wearing only a thin blouse. Her body shook, her head hung low. I ran to her and scooped her into my arms. She was as cold as ice. Tears filled my eyes. Anger burned inside me. With every step toward the Sterling's door, I felt heavier. But I didn't stop. I pounded on the door, my knocks drowning out the Christmas music. Nobody came. I banged again, harder this time. Finally, the door opened. Mrs. Genevieve stood there, holding a glass of wine. Her lips were painted bright red, and she smiled like she didn't care. "Well, Miss Alara, what a surprise," she said sweetly. "Why didn't you tell us? We would have rolled out the red carpet." I glared at her, not hiding my anger. "If I told you," I growled, "I wouldn't have seen this. What did you do to my daughter?" I held Liana tighter, her faint breaths warm against my neck. And I knew I couldn't let this go. Genevieve raised one eyebrow and looked at Liana in my arms with a face that showed she was annoyed. She looked at Liana like she was a problem. "Liana just wanted some fresh air," Genevieve said softly, but there was something mean in her voice. "Don't make this a big deal. It's Christmas. Come inside. Don't stand out in the cold." Her words felt like a slap on my face. Fresh air. My poor daughter was standing outside in freezing weather wearing only a thin blouse. Before I could say anything, Caspian, her husband, came and stood behind his mother. His shirt was half unbuttoned like he didn't care. He held a bottle of wine and looked at me with anger and pride. "Mom, close the door," Caspian said, lifting his chin high like he was better than everyone. "Let her stay outside until she stops acting weak. Who comes to Christmas dinner just to look sad and avoid helping?" Then he laughed like he'd said something smart. Those words were like another sharp knife, stabbing both me and Liana. I felt Liana's body curl up in my arms like she wanted to disappear. From the dining table, Serafina's voice rang out, sharp and mean like poison. "Exactly," she said loudly. "A woman who can't even have a baby is useless. What is she worth?" Her cold laugh filled the room and mixed with whispers from the other family members. At that moment, Serafina's 2 kids came running from the table. They were Liana's cousins. They peeked at Liana, then giggled and whispered to each other, "Aunt Liana is in trouble." Their little voices felt like salt poured into an open wound. I felt my face burn with anger. I pushed hard on the door with my shoulder, then kicked it open. The door slammed against the wall with a loud bang that made the whole room go silent. Genevieve's wine glass shook, and red wine spilled onto their fancy carpet. The Christmas music stopped suddenly, like someone unplugged it. The air felt heavy, like there wasn't enough oxygen to breathe. I stepped inside, holding Liana tight. My boots left wet snow on their shiny floor with every step I took. The whole family stared at me. Mr. Alistair's face was cold. Genevieve's fake smile was gone. Serafina's eyes were full of hate. Everyone else looked shocked or annoyed. But I didn't care. I carefully put Liana on the couch and wrapped my scarf around her shoulders. Her hands were still ice cold, and she was shaking like the winter air had followed her inside. I knelt down in front of her, trying to show her I was strong, even though I was filled with rage and pain. The Sterling's living room was bright with lights. The fireplace crackled, but the air was thick like everyone was waiting for a fight. Caspian stepped closer. His face was red from drinking. His eyes were mean but proud. He lowered his voice, trying to sound calm, but he was smug. "You don't get to make a scene in my house, Alara," he said slowly, stressing the words "my house" to remind me I wasn't welcome. He stood tall with one hand on his hip, his shirt still open. But I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of fear. He knew I wasn't afraid of him. I jumped to my feet, pointing right at him. My voice shook with anger. "And you think it's okay to throw my daughter outside in the freezing cold? You let her almost freeze to death." My heart pounded with rage. Is this what you call being a husband? Is this what you call family? I looked at the dinner table. The plates were full of steaming food. The wine glasses sparkled under the lights like they were mocking Liana's pain. Mr. Alistair stood up slowly from the head of the table. He fixed his suit jacket and spoke in a deep, powerful voice. "That's enough, Ms. Alara," he said coldly. "This is a family matter. A woman who can't have children needs to learn to endure. That's how life is." His cruel words hit me like a hammer. He stood there like a judge, proud and untouchable. But today he was wrong. I looked at the table again. The roasted turkey smelled delicious. The cornbread stuffing was neatly arranged. Wine sparkled in tall glasses. And then I looked at Liana. She was curled up on the couch, still shaking, her empty stomach growling softly. I couldn't hold my anger anymore. My voice Alara like thunder. "You all sit here enjoying your feast while my daughter is outside in 32 degrees weather. No coat, no food, and you call this Christmas tradition? This is humanity to you." Genevieve shrugged like I was overreacting. Her smile was cold as she lifted her glass. "A woman who can't have kids is a waste," she said calmly. "Even if she eats, she's still a waste." She sipped her wine like nothing I said mattered. Serafina leaned forward from the table, her voice sharp and mean. "Your daughter always uses depression as an excuse to avoid work. Has she ever cooked one proper meal for this family? No. She just stays in bed crying, making everyone miserable." She shook her head with disgust. The family started whispering and murmuring. Some of them shook their heads, others chuckled quietly, agreeing with Serafina. Each sound was like a stab in my heart. I wanted to flip their fancy table over. Then a soft voice spoke. Liana. She was trying to sit up, her trembling hands gripping the couch. "I'm so tired," she whispered. Her voice was weak and shaky. "No one understands." Her words were crushed by Caspian's loud voice. "Enough," he shouted, his face red with anger. "Shut up. You've embarrassed me enough already." He stepped toward her, his cold eyes like daggers. Liana's shoulders sank and tears filled her red eyes. My heart twisted. I jumped in front of her, ready to protect her no matter what. Memories of Liana's pain rushed through my mind. I remembered all the times she called me crying, heartbroken after losing a baby. The first time, the second, the third, the fourth. Each miscarriage shattered her soul. She used to be a sweet girl who dreamed of family dinners with her husband and kids. But the pain broke her piece by piece. I tried to comfort her over long-distance phone calls, but I never thought her husband's family would treat her this way. Caspian, the man I thought was decent, was nothing but a bully. Through the window, I saw Cale standing outside. He had probably been walking by and heard everything. His fists were clenched, and his face was hard with anger. I gave him a small nod to wait. I felt stronger knowing someone else saw the truth. Caspian pointed at me, his politeness gone. I'm warning you. This is my house, he said, his voice sharp. Stay out of it or things will get worse. He smirked, sure I would back down. But he was wrong. I clenched my fist so hard my knuckles cracked. My voice was calm but sharp. You think you can threaten me? You think you can keep hurting my daughter and get away with it? You're wrong, Caspian. I turned to look at the entire family, at Mr. Alistair's cold stare, at Genevieve's smirk, at Seraphina's glare. All of you, I said loudly, are going to pay for what you've done to Liana. The room went silent. I placed my hand gently on Liana's shoulder. She was so thin under the scarf. My voice was steady. This isn't a family issue anymore. This is domestic abuse. Everyone froze. My words dropped into the room like a heavy stone. Genevieve let out a mocking laugh, swirling her wine. Abuse, she repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. We're just teaching her her place. You should be grateful we even put up with her. Caspian stepped closer, his breath smelling like alcohol. His words were sharp and cruel. She's faking depression, faking pain to do nothing. No one hits her. We're just tired of her being useless. Then his smile turned twisted. Tell me, Alara. No woman loses 4 babies by accident. Maybe she did it on purpose. Those words were like a razor blade. They didn't just cut my heart. They tore Liana apart. She gasped like someone had punched her. I remembered all 4 of those terrible phone calls. Each time Liana's voice breaking as she cried, telling me she had lost another baby. And now Caspian dared to say she did it on purpose. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. My face burned with rage. He had crossed a line he could never come back from. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking, but my voice calm. I'm calling the police, I said coldly. A report will be filed. You will answer to the law. Caspian froze. The wine bottle slipped from his hand and crashed on the floor. Red wine spread across the expensive carpet. He looked scared but tried to act tough. You wouldn't dare, he yelled, but his voice shook. Mr. Alistair stepped forward, fixing his tie. His deep, booming voice filled the room. You have no idea who you're up against, Alara. I've been a judge for years. Do you think a simple phone call will scare us? His eyes were sharp and full of power. But I didn't care. I'd seen my daughter shivering outside in the freezing cold. Nothing would stop me now. Seraphina crossed her arms and smirked. Go ahead, call them, she said. Let's see who they believe. A crazy old lady like you or a respected family like ours. You think the police will take your side. She laughed cruelly, sure I would lose. Liana was still sitting on the couch. She held my sleeve and whispered with a shaky voice, Mom, please don't do it. I just want peace. Her red, swollen eyes were full of fear. She looked so scared, like she thought things would only get worse if I acted. My heart hurt seeing her like this. I knew she was afraid the Sterling family would be mean again, afraid she would be humiliated even more. But I also knew that if I stopped now, Liana would stay trapped in this pain forever. I held her hand tightly, trying to share my courage with her. You don't have to be scared, I whispered softly but firmly. I'll protect you. I promise. I lifted Liana in my arms. Snowflakes from her clothes fell onto the rug like tiny broken pieces of a dream. I ignored the Sterling family's mean stares and their muttered threats. All I cared about was getting my daughter away from that awful house. She had been locked in their cruelty for too long. As I walked to the door, I saw Cale through the foggy glass window. He was standing on the porch, his hand on his police radio, his eyes glowing with determination. He looked ready to act. I gave him a small nod to show him I was ready too. Cale nodded back, gripping his radio like a promise he wouldn't let anything happen to us. I walked out of that house without looking back. Behind me, I heard Genevieve yelling at the housekeeper to clean up spilled wine. Caspian slammed his hand on the table, muttering a curse. Mr. Alistair's deep, angry voice echoed as he called someone on the phone. Every sound felt like an arrow in my back, but I didn't care. I carried Liana to my small apartment near the National Training Center where I had worked as a coach for years. It wasn't fancy. There was a tiny living room with an old couch, a small kitchen, and a few family photos on the wall. But to me, it was safe. It was a place where I could protect my daughter from insults and cold cruelty. I took Liana to her room and laid her gently on the bed. She was still shaking, even though I wrapped her in my thick coat. I found an old sweater in the closet and put it on her. Then I made her a mug of hot cocoa. The sweet smell filled the cold apartment. "Drink this, sweetheart," I whispered, putting the mug in her hands. But Liana just stared at it. Her eyes looked empty, like she thought she didn't deserve even a little comfort. Suddenly, my phone rang, breaking the quiet. It was Kale. His deep, calm voice came through the phone. "Ms. Alara, I filed the first report at the station, but the Sterlings are powerful. They'll fight hard. I'm ready to be a witness for you if you need me." I could feel his determination, like a small flame that never went out. Kale used to be my student, a bright-eyed boy in my Taekwondo classes. Now he was standing by me in this new kind of battle. "Help me prepare, Kale," I said, my voice full of gratitude. "This is going to be a long fight." "I got it, coach." "I'm here," he replied simply. The next morning, I took Liana to see a therapist in downtown Boise. Dr. Isla Reed was an older woman with warm, kind eyes. She welcomed us into her cozy office. After speaking with Liana, she looked at me with a sad expression. "She's suffering from deep depression, Ms. Alara," Dr. Reed said gently. "Her miscarriages, along with constant insults from her in-laws, have crushed her confidence. She needs treatment, rest, and to feel safe." Hearing those words felt like a knife to my heart. I knew Liana was struggling, but hearing it out loud made the pain worse. I looked at my daughter, curled up in the chair with her hands clutched tightly together, and blamed myself for not being there sooner. That afternoon, Kale came by the apartment, no longer in his police uniform. He carried a bag of fresh fruit and some old cookbooks. He set them on the table in front of Liana, hesitating. "I know you like cooking," he said softly. "Maybe starting small, like making a pie or some chicken soup, could help." His voice was gentle, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Liana lowered her head and clutched her blouse. "Thanks," she whispered, "but I don't think I can do anything anymore." Her words stabbed my heart like a needle. Kale's face fell, but he didn't push her. He just nodded quietly and left the bag on the table. "Ms. Alara," he said to me as he left, "whatever you need, just say it. I've got your back." That night, after Liana fell asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table under the dim light. The apartment was silent until I heard a soft noise outside. A thick envelope slid under the front door, silent like a shadow. I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. The messy letters read, "Don't mess with the Sterling family if you don't want to end up miserable like your daughter. Give up." My blood boiled. I crumpled the note and threw it into the trash with a loud thud, breaking the silence. That threat didn't scare me. It made me even angrier. They thought I would give up. They were wrong. That night, I started gathering proof. I pulled out every bank receipt showing the money I had sent Liana over the years. I found every message I wrote to her, reminding her I loved her. Each paper was not just evidence. It was a memory of all the times I had been there for her, even when Caspian and his family wasted the money. I remembered every phone call when Liana asked if she could buy something for the house, only for Caspian to say no. My hand shook with anger as I gripped my pen so hard it almost snapped. I had trusted Caspian to care for my daughter, but he had treated her like nothing. In the middle of the night, Liana came out of her room, trembling. She saw me at the table, surrounded by papers, my eyes tired but full of determination. "Mom," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "I'm scared. I'm scared they'll hurt you." I stood up and hugged her tightly. Her body felt so fragile in my arms. "You don't have to be afraid," I said firmly, though I was nervous too. "I'll protect you from everything. I promise." I tucked her back into bed and stayed by her side until she fell asleep. But I couldn't rest. I went back to the kitchen table and made a long list of what needed to be done. I called an old lawyer friend who had once helped me with a case involving my Taekwondo team. He promised to help but warned me. "The Sterlings are powerful, Ms. Alara. They know judges. This will be a long fight." "I know," I said quietly, "but I won't stop." The weeks of preparing for the case felt like a never-ending nightmare. Every night, I sat under the dim lamp, going through bank receipts and medical reports about Liana. The numbers and words were cold, but they showed the truth of how much she had suffered and how much I loved her. Finally, the first day of the trial arrived. It felt like stepping onto a taekwondo mat for a big fight. Liana and I walked into the Boise courthouse. The cold morning air bit through my coat. Liana's hand was icy and trembling in mine. She had dark circles under her eyes, and she kept her head down, as if she wanted to disappear. I tried to stay strong for her. "I'm here," I whispered, giving her hand a squeeze. She nodded weakly, but her empty eyes showed she had already lost hope. The Sterling family was already inside. Caspian wore a sharp gray suit, looking confident like a lawyer. He glanced at us with a smirk. Mr. Alastair, moving slowly but looking sharp as a knife, smiled confidently, like he already knew he'd win. Genevieve and Serafina sat together, dressed elegantly, whispering and throwing us cold looks. Cale was sitting in the back, wearing his police uniform. He gave me a small nod. His steady gaze felt like a promise that he would not abandon us. I nodded back, grateful he had been by our side since that terrifying Christmas Eve. The trial began. My lawyer, Mr. Bennett, stood and showed all our evidence. He displayed every bank transfer I'd sent Liana to prove I'd always supported her, even though Caspian controlled the money. He also shared Liana's medical records with the therapist's notes about her depression. "After 4 miscarriages and constant insults from her husband's family," Mr. Bennett said, his voice heavy with sadness, "Liana was not just physically hurt. She was emotionally broken. They treated her like she didn't belong." I glanced at Liana. Her head was bowed, her hands clasped tightly like she was trying to hold herself together. I wanted to hug her, but I stayed seated, trusting our lawyer. Then the Sterling's young lawyer stood up confidently. "Liana is faking her illness," he said firmly. "The Sterling family gave her everything: food, shelter, comfort. But she failed as a wife." Those words felt like a slap to my face. I clenched my fists, blood boiling with anger. They called a witness, Mrs. Martha, the Sterling's former housekeeper. Her eyes darted nervously as she spoke. "Mrs. Liana was lazy," she said. "She locked herself in her room all day. I had to do everything, cooking, cleaning." I couldn't believe it. Liana had always cooked lovingly, making pies and meals for that family. Now they were calling her lazy. I jumped to my feet. "You're lying. Liana was never like that." I shouted. The judge, a stern man, slammed his gavel. "Silence," he said coldly. "This is a courtroom." I sat back down, my heart pounding. I looked at Mr. Alastair, who was smiling slightly, giving a small nod to the judge. A chill ran through me. They had planned this whole thing. We were just pawns in their game. Liana sat hunched, shaking, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. I saw Cale in the back, his jaw tight, fists clenched with silent anger. Mr. Bennett didn't give up. "We'd like to present key evidence," he said. "A recording from Christmas Eve that shows the Sterling family's cruelty." He played Cale's secret recording. Caspian's voice boomed coldly. "She's faking depression to avoid her duties." Genevieve's voice followed, sharp and cruel. "A woman who can't have kids is useless." Serafina added, "She can't even give birth." The courtroom went silent. Whispers filled the air. Liana shrank in her chair, stabbed again by their words. But the Sterling's lawyer jumped up. "Objection. This recording is illegal. It was made without consent. It violates privacy rights." The judge nodded firmly. "The recording is inadmissible." It felt like the ground had been ripped away beneath me. The strongest proof we had, the proof of their cruelty, was thrown out. Whispers filled the big courtroom. Some people gasped like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Others just shook their heads, confused. I looked over at Cale. His head was bent low, his fist shaking on his knees. Liana had her face buried in her hands, her shoulders trembling as she tried not to cry too loudly. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run up to the judge and beg for justice, to make him see how wrong this was. But deep down, I already knew justice wasn't on our side today. Across the room, Mr. Alastair sat there, calm and smug. His face looked like he already knew how everything would end. He didn't even need to gloat. His cold smile said it all. I squeezed Liana's hand tighter, trying to give her strength, even though I felt broken myself. It had been a long, hard week. Every day of the trial was painful and exhausting. I had tried to be strong all week, but every night when we went back to my tiny apartment, I would sit alone and cry. My heart ached so badly. Liana was pale and exhausted, her eyes red from sleepless nights. She sat next to me now, her cold, trembling fingers wrapped tightly in mine. I tried to pass her courage, though I was shaking too. Caspian strolled into the courtroom, fixing his tie like this was just another normal day. His mother, Genevieve, smoothed her fancy dress and sat up tall, her lips painted a dark red. She smiled confidently, like she already knew they'd win. Serafina, wearing flashy clothes, gave us a hateful glare. Mr. Alastair stood behind Caspian, his tall frame and hard stare reminding us that the Sterling family was always in control. Cale sat in the audience section, still in his police uniform. His strong, steady eyes couldn't hide the worry in them. He gave me a small nod, a quiet promise that he'd stand by us no matter what. I looked back at him with gratitude. Then the judge walked in. He was a middle-aged man with no expression on his face. His cold eyes sent a chill through me. The air in the room grew heavy, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for a hammer to fall. The judge's voice was dry and firm as he spoke. The court grants the divorce of Liana Harper Larson and Caspian Sterling. For a moment, hope sparked in my chest. Liana's tears ran silently down her cheeks, but I squeezed her hand, telling her without words to stay strong. This divorce was Liana's chance to finally be free of the cruel Sterling family. But the judge wasn't finished. His voice stayed cold and lifeless as he kept reading. However, the court does not recognize the claims of domestic abuse due to insufficient legal evidence. As for property, since Caspian Sterling contributed more to the marriage, the court awards him the majority of the shared assets. The words felt like a heavy hammer smashing my chest. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. No recognition of the abuse. No justice. All the proof we'd gathered, the recordings, the medical files, the receipts, none of it mattered. The Sterling lawyers had twisted everything around and used it against Liana. Then I saw Mr. Alastair tilt his head slightly, that smug smile still there. It hit me like lightning. He had rigged everything. He used his power and connections to bend the law. Liana and I were just pawns in their cruel game. I couldn't hold back anymore. I jumped to my feet, my voice breaking with rage and pain. This is so unfair. This is injustice. My words echoed loudly, silencing the whole room. Liana grabbed my hand, her eyes wide with panic, but I didn't stop. You saw how they treated my daughter. You heard what she went through, and you still say there was no abuse? You dare take everything from her. A guard walked toward me, his voice firm. Ma'am, please sit down, or I'll have to ask you to leave. I glared at him and then at the judge, whose face stayed blank like my words meant nothing. My heart sank and I sat down. My hands were shaking as I watched Caspian turn to look at me with a mocking smile. He straightened his tie, smug and proud like he'd won some kind of prize. Genevieve and Serafina whispered to each other and giggled cruelly, making sure I heard. Their laughter was like a knife stabbing me. Mr. Alastair just nodded calmly, like this was all part of his plan. Liana hid her face in her hands, her sobs muffled but heartbreaking. I wanted to hug her, to tell her it would be okay, but the words wouldn't come. They'd stolen everything. Liana's dignity, her property, her safety, even my belief in the justice system. In the back of the room, Cale stood abruptly, his glare fixed on the Sterlings. I saw his arms tense, veins bulging, fists clenched tight. He looked like he was about to explode. I motioned for him to calm down, though I wanted to scream and smash everything too. The judge slammed his gavel. Order. The session is over. Everyone may leave. The sound of the gavel echoed like a final nail in a coffin. People started standing, whispering, gathering their papers. But I stayed there, holding Liana tightly as she sobbed into my arms. My heart was breaking. Caspian strolled over to us, his smile cold and cruel. He leaned down to whisper in my ear, "See, Alara? I told you not to fight me. You're just a useless old woman. Then he straightened his suit and walked away like we didn't matter. His words were like gasoline on a fire. My blood boiled. I clenched my fists so tightly they hurt. I felt like I was about to explode, to punch him in the face and finally make him pay. Years of being a taekwondo coach had taught me control, but right now, all that training felt useless. I took a step forward, ready to do something I might regret. Suddenly, Kale rushed to stand between us, his fist shaking, his face red with fury. I saw my anger reflected in his eyes, a storm he could barely hold back. The courtroom buzzed as people whispered, "Are they going to fight?" A cop throwing punches in court. Some people even took out their phones. Camera flashes lit up the room. A journalist raised his camera, eager for a scandal. Caspian smirked coldly. "Go ahead. Hit me. I'll make sure you lose everything. Who do you think you are? Just a low-life cop." Kale's breathing grew heavy, his fists trembling. I knew he was seconds away from doing something he couldn't take back. Then Liana broke free from my arms and ran to Kale. She grabbed his arm tightly, crying. Her voice cracked. "No. Please don't. I don't want you or Mom to become like him. I just want peace. I just want to live." Her cry cut through the air, silencing the entire room. Liana clung to Kale like he was her last hope. Kale froze, his body still trembling with rage. Slowly, his fists loosened and his arms dropped to his sides. He bowed his head, breathing hard, trying to calm down. The cameras clicked, capturing Liana's sobbing face and Kale's pain. Even people who didn't know the case were crying. A woman wiped her tears. A man shook his head sadly. But the Sterlings? They didn't care. Genevieve and Serafina whispered to each other with cold smiles. Mr. Alastair stood there calm, still in control. The judge slammed his gavel again. "Order. If this continues, I will clear the room." His voice snapped everyone back to reality. I stepped forward, gently pulling Liana into my arms. She cried harder, shaking like a lost child. Kale stood beside us, silent, his head bowed, blaming himself for not doing more. I placed a hand on his shoulder to let him know I understood. I was grateful he was there. Caspian fixed his tie and walked out, his victory heavy in the air. Genevieve and Serafina followed, laughing softly, their cruelty cutting deep. Slowly the courtroom emptied until only the three of us were left, me, Liana, and Kale. We all felt the same bitter pain, like a stone in our throats. Liana's breath was weak against my shoulder as she whispered, "Mom, I don't want to fight anymore. I'm tired. Can we just go home?" Her words shattered me. I wanted to promise her that everything would be okay, but my throat was tight and no words came. We left the courtroom together. Kale walked silently beside us, his eyes still fierce but protective. The Boise sunlight streamed through the tall windows, but its warmth couldn't reach my heart. Today wasn't just a loss. It felt like the beginning of a long war. The Sterlings had won in court, but I wouldn't let them win over Liana's life. I looked at my daughter. Her red, puffy eyes still had a small spark, a tiny flicker of hope. I swore to myself I'd fight for that spark no matter what. In the days after the trial, Boise buzzed with whispers. People were talking. The news ran bold headlines: Sterling trial, justice bought. Seeing those words made my heart pound. Finally, someone else could see the truth. On social media, a video of Liana clinging to Kale in court spread like wildfire. People saw my daughter's tears, her shaking voice begging for peace. Strangers filled the comments with outrage. The Sterlings think they can control everything. Liana deserves better. Reading those words in our small apartment gave me a tiny bit of comfort. The court had turned its back on us, but the people were speaking. The Sterlings' victory started to crumble. Rumors spread that Mr. Alastair had used his connections to twist the truth. Caspian, once respected, was now called the lawyer of injustice. Their reputation, once strong, was breaking apart like a sandcastle washed away by the tide. I didn't feel joy, but I felt a tiny piece of justice. Not from the law, but from the voices of the people. Liana came to live with me in my little apartment. The soft yellow glow of lamps lit the rooms. Family pictures hung on the walls, wrapping us in a warmth that the Sterlings could never take away. Every morning, I woke up early to make breakfast for Liana. Sometimes I cooked pancakes with sweet maple syrup, and other times I made scrambled eggs with warm toast. Liana sat slowly at the table, holding a mug of hot tea in her hands. She often stared quietly out the window, where soft sunlight peeked over the rooftops of Boise. Some mornings, I saw silent tears slide down her cheeks like tiny raindrops. But I knew that Liana was slowly getting better. Each day she spoke a little more. Her eyes, which once looked so empty, now showed a small spark of life. I never pushed her to talk. I just stayed close, ready to protect her, like a mother bird guarding her nest. Kale had become an important part of our lives. He visited often. Sometimes he brought a small bouquet of bright red poinsettias, and other times he came with a box of sweet donuts from the little bakery on the corner. Liana lit up every time Kale visited, like his presence was medicine that helped her heart heal. One afternoon, Kale looked a little nervous as he handed Liana a tiny box. Inside was a keychain shaped like a taekwondo uniform, the same symbol I had taught him and all my students about. "You don't have to be strong right away," Kale said softly, his voice calm but sure. "You can start over, step by step, just like Ms. Alara did." Liana froze, holding the keychain tightly. Her eyes filled with tears that sparkled like glass. She pressed her lips together and nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice small but full of emotion. I watched from a distance, silent, feeling like a heavy weight was being lifted from my chest. For so many years, Liana had been treated badly. She was called useless, worthless, and made to feel small. Now, someone finally saw her true worth. Someone valued her not because of what she could do, but because of who she was inside. I turned away quietly and wiped a tear from my own cheek. I didn't want Liana to see me cry. One golden evening, as the sun filled the apartment with warm light, Liana sat across from Kale on the couch. Her head was bowed, and she twisted the hem of her sweater nervously. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Kale, I might never be able to have children. If that disappoints you," she stopped talking, like she was scared that her words would ruin everything. I stood in the kitchen, pretending to wash dishes, but my heart froze. I waited for Kale's reply. He smiled, a warm, steady smile, and gently held Liana's hands. "I don't need that, Liana," he said softly. "You're already my family." Those words felt like a burst of warm air melting all the cold pain in my heart. My eyes filled with tears. For years, Liana had been humiliated and made to feel like a failure because she couldn't have children. But now, someone was telling her she was enough. She was loved just for being herself. I turned away, letting the tears fall quietly, my heart overflowing with gratitude too big for words. Easter arrived, and I took Liana's hand as we walked through Boise's main square. It reminded me of when she was a little girl, skipping happily down bright, colorful streets. The square was alive with laughter from children playing, and the sweet smell of fresh baked pies floated through the air from food stalls. Liana wore a light sweater, her hair tied up neatly. For the first time in months, I saw her smile. A real, bright, springtime smile that warmed my heart. "Mom," she said softly, her voice gentle, "I miss these days. I miss when you taught me how to bake apple pies. I miss when you told me stories about your taekwondo matches." I smiled and squeezed her hand. "I miss those days too, sweetheart," I said. "But I'll always be here to make new memories with you." We sat together on a wooden bench, watching kids laugh and splash by the fountain. And right then, I realized something powerful. Courtrooms can sometimes twist justice. Money and power can buy lies. But there is another kind of justice, justice of the heart. Love, respect, resilience. That justice can never be taken away. Liana had lost so much, but she was finding herself again, step by step, day by day. And me, a mother who once felt powerless, now knew that my greatest strength wasn't in the punches I threw in the taekwondo ring. It was in my love for my daughter. Kale appeared, carrying a paper bag of warm churros. He handed one to Liana, and soon they were laughing and chatting like old friends. I watched them, my heart full of hope. Liana might never forget the scars left by the Sterlings, but she was learning to move forward. She was learning to love herself and trust the people who truly valued her. And I, now 65 years old, and after fighting many battles in life, knew this for certain. The fight for Liana's happiness was the most meaningful fight I had ever faced. This story is made up, but it comes from real feelings and experiences. The names and places have been changed to protect people's privacy. I'm not telling this story to judge anyone. I'm sharing it so that someone out there might pause and think about how many mothers suffer quietly in their own homes. If you were me, what would you do? Would you stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you speak up and fight to get your voice back? I really want to know what you think, because every story is like a candle that can help light someone else's path. I believe with all my heart that God always blesses those who choose courage. Courage always leads to brighter days. At the end of this video, I've added 2 of our channel's most loved stories. I promise they'll surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the end.